Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest instalment of the Mayor Talks. This is the second in my series of YouTube interviews with influential religious people in the borough in preparation for the big video for Holocaust Memorial Day next week. So, Jonathan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I'm Jonathan Clark. I'm Bishop of Croydon, which is one of the bishops in the Church of England Diocese of Southwark, which covers most of South London, and my bit of it is Croydon and Sutton and the eastern quarter of Surrey. And I'm based here in Croydon, living up just outside East Croydon, and I've been here since March 2012.
Well, and you're amazing, Jonathan. Jonathan holds a very particular close place in my heart because the first event I attended as deputy mayor, literally the first thing I had to do, 10 o'clock the morning after I was sworn in, was an event with Jonathan around up in Southwark Cathedral. So I owe a lot of the confidence in how to do the engagements and stuff to his kind and understanding words on that day. Excuse me. Right, as per usual, we've got some pre-prepared questions which we're going to work our way through during this next hour. But as usual, we will just see how the conversation takes us. And thank you, as per usual, once again for watching the Mayor Talks. So, Jonathan, let's start off with a really lovely question. What do you love most about Croydon?
Yeah, well,
as our bishop.
Having sort of thought about the question and then I was thinking about the answer, I think the answer is the whole lot, really, because it's the diversity of the borough, which I think is the thing that I love most. The fact that you can go from, being atop Addington Hills and looking like you're in the middle of sort of some rural idyll, right into sort of, the bustling middle of Thornton Heath, and the fact that you've got people of so many different ethnic groups, the fact that you've got people of different faiths, the fact that you've got people with really different life experiences and the wisdom that brings. I just love the fact that it's such a wonderful mixture. And you find, different bits of the mixture, where you weren't maybe necessarily expecting it. I mean, there's one of the churches in Sanderstead where they've got a building project on. And the last time I was there, I was saying, well, hope next time I'll be back. I'll be coming to open your new hall that you're building. And they're right in the middle of Sanderstead. There's some lovely Caribbean ladies who are part of that congregation there. And I've said to them, and when I come back, I want some curried goat and fried plantain. Because when I was parish priest in North London, that was one of the staples of our parish dues, and I really miss it. But
tell me about it.
You wouldn't necessarily expect it in South Croydon, but that's the way we are. We're actually much more mixed across the whole borough than I think some people sometimes think, and I just love that.
No, I think that is a very, very valid point. I've lived in Croydon my whole life. I was born in Mayday, and I grew up in South Norwood, and I moved as far sat between South Norwood to Addiscombe, so all about one road away. But I still didn't realise how much the borough I didn't know until when I became deputy mayor and then mayor. You go from thinking that you understand your borough to realising you don't really understand it when you become a councillor, but you do slowly become to understand your little patch, and then you lose sight again of how big the scale is beyond your own patch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a bit like from being a parish priest to being a bishop. Because when you're a parish priest, you've got your little patch and you know every wrinkle and every street corner. And then one of the big things for me was becoming bishop was realizing I couldn't do that anymore because I've got, 100 odd parishes, can't know them all intimately, but the compensation for that is actually so much diversity, so many different places to go. Yeah.
No, I just continuing that. It is extraordinary, and Croydon has its challenges. We've always acknowledged it on this channel, the problems Croydon is currently facing from that to go with the pandemic, but also to our financial challenges. Mm-hmm. But I genuinely still feel that Croydon should be held up as a shining example of how wonderful multiculturalism is. and how well it can work and should work. And it just proves the kind of people that try and have this idea about different people in different religious faiths, different backgrounds, different cultures not mixing. I just tell them, go and have a look at Croydon.
Yeah,
and we do it well.
Yeah, and people do. They just they get on with each other, and they get on with their stuff. Do their various things, but also relate together really well most of the time. And I think one of the things you do get a feel of in so many different parts of Croydon, and one of the things about Croydon is that it's, there are lots and lots of different places where people feel they belong, so that, people feel they belong in Addiscombe, or they belong in Coulsdon, or whatever, and yeah, they're part of Croydon, but they're Coulsdon's where I'm really from, or whatever. But, in each of those places, there's that diversity in different sorts. And there's that sense of energy around the place, which is great.
I agree. And I mean, it's obviously a requisite of doing both of our jobs. To be bishop of somewhere or to be mayor of somewhere, you've got to care for your home. And so I would be lying if I wasn't suggesting that you and I were slightly biased in our high praise of our hometown, but I think it's still fair.
Yes. Well, I do have a counter bias in my history, because I was brought up in Bromley.
Oh, so, no.
It's true. Yeah.
That was my husband. He made that mistake as well, but we soon sorted that out. He now lives in Croydon, where he belongs.
I've had to overcome inherited prejudice in order to come to Croydon.
I just putting it out there. I absolutely adore the mayor of Bromley. We're massive friends, and we always tease each other about the rivalry between Croydon and Bromley. Mostly, it's actually quite nice to have a gentle and friendly rivalry with your neighbour.
Yeah.
But no, you and my husband alike have seen the Aeroways and come to the proper part of the boundary.
Indeed, yeah. and I've got one little bit of Bromley in my patch, because for some reason West Wickham is in the borough of the Diocese of Southwark and is part of the Croydon Episcopal area. So I've got this little bit of Bromley that is part of me. Yeah.
Well, weird enough, and I'm sure there's a lot of people in West Wickham that are going to, if they saw me, would probably give me a massive scowl with what I'm about to say. But the truth of the matter is, West Wickham has more in common with Croydon than Bromley. It's really just an extension of Shirley, to my way of thinking. Well, it's certainly a lot of the High Street is.
Well, I think most people in West Wickham seem to think that they're nothing to do with either. Actually, that we're West Wickham.
They're their own. I know. It's one of probably the only other patch apart from where I grew up and the ward that I currently represent that I'd have said I have a particularly intimate knowledge before I became mayor of, was because my husband tried to become a councillor in Shirley North.
Oh, right. Okay.
Was around that sort of stretch, so I do know that bit. From his day, when I used to hear pick up an awful lot of his casework for him.
How kind.
That was an interesting family relationship. Thanks, Mark. Because obviously he was still trying to learn how to do it, and when you're trying to get elected, it's still very new. I remember that feeling very, very well. Both times that I've been elected, I was heavily pregnant.
Okay.
During the campaign, I have a habit of giving birth about 10 weeks before elections.
Right. Okay. Does your husband need to sort of bear this in mind for future elections? I mean, how many?
We've had this discussion. We've had two. We've had a discussion. We'd both like more children, and they come along when they come along. But there is a consensus growing within the group that he probably needs to move out about 10 months before elections are due for a couple of months, just to be on the safe side.
We stopped with two because we felt we were quite outnumbered enough already. So
I know it's one of those sort of situations where we've always known that we wanted a slightly bigger family than average. We love our sons, and we'd be perfectly happy if we just kept having our beautiful boys Theo and Liam, and that was it, and there's the four of us. But we're on the side of thinking that it'd be nice to have another one. So it's one of those situations. Well, if it happens, it happens.
Yeah.
But we acknowledge the challenges that come with political life and having a family. But that is something that I've always spoken about as a mayor. You can have both. It is perfectly fine to have a family and to have a job and to be a politician. So don't want anybody that's a mum or planning to become a mum or a father to be put off from becoming a councillor, or indeed a bishop.
Indeed, a bishop. Because I mean, one of the things that local politicians and clergy have in common is that they're out most evenings. Because actually that's part of the job, because obviously when you're leading a parish, then a lot of your congregation members are at work during the day. So, meetings and visits and all those sorts of things tend to happen in the evening. So, you try and get used to a pattern of living where you can actually respect all the different calls on your time, and try
I agree.
And make it a sort of creative balance, really.
I think it's also because you're out most evenings, but then each evening is slightly different. The timeframes are different, so you just have to be quite flexible and build into a degree of flexibility into your family as well. Yeah. It's funny we drifted towards this comparison because it's actually in my head. I've always felt there was a strong comparison between a call to political life and a call to religious life, because I think they are something that you feel you are called to do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. Well, it has to be a vocational element to it, because you wouldn't go into politics in order to make loads of money or have people like you, would you?
No.
And you certainly don't go into the church for the money, I'll tell you that much.
No. One of these days we'll compare, because I don't suppose they're very far different. People have an idea that we'll become rich, but I can promise you we don't.
Yeah. Well, I think, I don't think that. I think there's maybe one or two clergy in the Church of England who are higher rate taxpayers, but that's about it, So
I can say as mayor, I'm most definitely not.
No.
I have never earned enough. I've never earned enough in the council to even be probably. Actually, might be half the rate of a higher rate taxpayer now I'm on.
Yeah,
including my other job that I do part time.
But but you're right. There has to be a vocation to serve. I think that's the key thing. If you
I think that's
go into either politics or go into Christian ministry or any other religion either, for your own aggrandizement and to build yourself up, then you may succeed, but you won't really do the job you're called to do very well, because you won't be looking out for others. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. It's making a difference. I had a lot of experiences as a child, not personally to me. I had a wonderful childhood. My parents were brilliant, but an awful lot of the friends I had challenges of their own, and I was the one that they turned to in the moment they needed that support. And I remember making a promise to myself that I would do everything I could to try and make anybody else that came along subsequently experience of those situations better.
Yeah.
And that played into a lot of why I then now do the job I do. Mm-hmm. And I've heard so many people in religious life have, with similar variations of that, they had a moment where that desire to really do something and make the world a better place and help people became so powerful that's how they wanted to spend the rest of their life.
It's hugely fulfilling. I think it's one of the things that human beings are built to do, is to help each other. And sometimes people can find it quite challenging to actually make the first step, but when you do, you realize that actually there's nothing that gives you a better buzz, in the world, really, than actually helping other people. It's the best thing in the world, really. So it's like, I feel like I'm just privileged to be able to do a job in which I'm continually getting that sort of little endorphin shocks of saying, oh good, I've been able to do something nice for someone.
I agree, I really do. And I had some casework. It was a relatively simple bit of casework in the end. I managed to get it resolved. They emailed me, and I had it resolved within 24 hours. It was quite one of those ones where yes moments. And I came up, and my husband said, "You're beaming. Why are you beaming?" I said, "I just did some casework, and it just worked, and it was brilliant."
Yeah,
I loved it. You just get that. You say the endorphin shock from joy from actually having. No, you justified your existence on this planet that day.
Yeah, absolutely. You feel like, it's important to have been here. I did that. It helped someone. It's a really good thing to do. Yeah.
Right. I think I'm going to have to try and get us back to our questions, because I think the audience will tell that whenever Jonathan and I get together, with so many things that we want to talk about, that we have a tendency to go off topic, which is no bad thing with these discussions. But I need to try and see if we can get through the questions we agreed in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So let's go back to more the current moment and look at lockdown. So, how's lockdown been for you as a person, and for the church and the diocese, and from
Well, I've certainly discovered bits of Croydon I never knew existed, particularly when we were doing lockdown number 1 and we were trying to find somewhere new to walk to, because most of them, when I'm in normal times, if they ever come back again, I'm spending a lot of time, I'm either driving or taking the train or the bus out to this parish or that parish or up into town or whatever. And I'd never actually got out and walked around where I live. So one of the first things that lockdown did was to introduce me to my local area in a lot more detail than I'd ever known it before, and realized that actually how much of, particularly from sort of central Croydon and south, is actually basically a wood with houses in it, because there's so many trees. It's just so. And last spring, when it was so lovely, that was one of the things that sort of I really enjoyed, was discovering more bits of Croydon as a place. But I think for me, probably like everybody else, particularly now, there's that feeling of, oh my goodness, is this still going on? I saw someone's tweet the other day saying, well, I've had my 7-day trial of 2021. And I think I'd like to send it back and try a new one.
I had the same tweet. It's from I found my 7-day free trial to be totally unsatisfactory.
So I thought it was just so good, because it just feels like we're into a new year, but it's still really, really tough, and there's hope on the horizon with the vaccinations coming, and fortunately infection numbers are now going down here, but they're still too high, and it's been really hard. I've been so impressed with what's happened with certainly the churches that I'm responsible for, because when we had lockdown 1, suddenly, stop. And I was really, really impressed to see how clergy and lay people together worked out, all right, how are we going to do worship online? So, virtually everybody went online in one way or another, and loads of people who up to that point had quite happily said, I'm not a techie person, don't let me anywhere near it, suddenly discovered they could do things they never thought they could do or would have to do. And they all worked out different answers depending on what sort of community they are, and which platform people connect on, and all that sort of thing. That was great. And the other thing was the amount of energy and effort that's gone into trying to support the people who are particularly in extra need, even more so. With the food bank stuff, that's been tremendous, and trying to sort of connect with people who are lonely and isolated. There's been a huge amount of energy and commitment to all of that. So I'm just in awe really of a lot of the folk that I serve as bishop, because they've done really well, and it's been the same across other faith communities as well. Seeing some of the stuff that Croydon Mosque have done in helping provide meals for people and all sorts of stuff. So it's been really, really quite moving actually to see how people have responded.
I agree. I would just particularly pick up on that, the last point. I've often not spoken in this series of interviews about the fact that I did a visit around all the food banks of Croydon, and almost every single one of them was either some form of religious background to it, with maybe one exception. And it just shows that the power and the importance that religion still plays in our community, particularly in times of crisis.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it is statistically true that people of faith are disproportionately more there in things that reach out and help other people in communities across. It's not just in Croydon; it's across across the Western world anyway. It just is an engine that makes people think, I'll go and help. And
I think it takes us back to the previous point that we were making in the last question about the kind of connection between political and religious life. I think there is a sense of the community that's built up around similar sort of things, and religion, politics as well, but around religion, instills an idea of the value of community and the value of that comes from doing good.
Yeah.
And there was a sense that society had drifted away from that as a from that bond and that desire to do good over recent time. But one positive that I've regularly taken away from this, which is sounds surreal really, but in those contexts, is the rebirth of the sense of community that you've seen.
Yeah.
At the beginning of beginning of lockdown and the crisis, we saw people quite very much a me culture. We saw the from people panicking and the panic buying.
Yeah.
That disappeared. We saw lockdown, and suddenly there's this outpouring of from community love and support. And I got the feeling that created a renewed sense for religion and for the community that those sort of things bring.
Certainly, a lot of our communities have discovered that once they went online, they were actually getting a whole load of people coming and joining in worship online who hadn't been turning up at church ever. But both they found it, easier to do because, they could log in from home in their pajamas with their coffee or whatever. But also, and they could do it whatever time they wanted. But also, I think there was a sense that, like you say, realizing that this was a time when actually, just sorting it out yourself isn't going to work anymore. That actually we need each other in order to get through difficult times like this. And those sorts of building blocks of community, which faith communities provide, among others, I think have become really important for people. Yeah.
You've seen a renewed faith in our institutions from in a great deal of people, and the old-fashioned traditions, not in the sense of kind of necessarily focused and strict, but the ones that kind of that are the support networks. Say from people reached out for that support network, and it's resulted in this outpouring of genuine community spirit that I've seen from so many people. And I use the mutual aid network as being such a good example of that. I've said so many times as a counsellor, and I'm sure you'll find that you'll back me up that you find the same from your perspective. You can spend your entire career focusing on trying to get communities organised and trying to get people to work together and to actually kind of fight for themselves. And you can spend that entire time hitting your head against a brick wall. And in my own ward, there's nothing I would like more than set up a business forum, for example. And every time I start, it gets knocked back. And yet the pandemic hit, and suddenly this entire detailed big scale network was born. I know there was an awful lot of people that should deserve recognition for their hard work in making that happen. There's too many to name, but I will at some point try and make sure one of these interviews was with somebody from the mutual aid network, because I think they deserve it. But the fact was that as soon as those people said it, people flooded to it. People flooded to that, to doing that and to being part of that.
Yeah, and remember when there was all that sort of sign up to help the NHS, etc., and there was so many people, they were overwhelmed, and then they had the problem that they got far more people than they were expecting, and not knowing what not having a job to give to everybody. But it was really impressive to see how many people wanted to help. It's just lovely. Yeah, and
I'm sure that obviously was exaggerated, or it was compounded, if that's not too much of a negative word, by the fact that obviously so many people were on furlough, which meant that there was more time in the day.
Yeah. But
I'm sure that obviously added to it. But that even then, that desire, whether at the time or not, was something that I hadn't seen in that scale ever in my, granted, not a long career, but in the 16, 17 years that I've been involved in politics directly.
Yeah.
We've also, it's funny enough, we've actually kind of drifted on to what was our third question, which is how the faith communities have responded to the pandemic.
Oh, yes, we have.
Which is no bad thing. It means it's a more of a natural conversation. But I don't know if there's anything else that we should be picking up about that. And I mentioned the food banks from a particular
I think from the point of view of, as I see it from the faith community's point of view, I think there's been a feeling that the whole of what faith, living a life of faith is about, has become sort of more sort of integrated in a sense, because actually, you know, doing good for other people, worshiping God is all part of the same thing. It's not like, you get together to worship and then think, oh, well, we're here now, so let's do something good. It's all, it's all part of the same package. And I think people have felt that more strongly themselves, which has been great. So I think it's been really good for most people who are part of faith communities. But of course, when you're, I think every faith community represented in Croydon desires the common good. So it's not just about people who happen to be your faith or your community. It's actually about doing something which is building up the community as a whole. And that, I think, has been really, really strong. I just want to continue to be able to build on that, and to grow that sense of our sort of commonality and working together, for the good of society as a whole. That's one of my key aims, I think, for coming out the other side, is how to hold on to those really good things.
Yeah, I agree. It feels the same way for me as well. I mean, obviously my tenure in this role is very short. I would like to think that I will start when I move on to other things and my successor takes over. What I'll have done is I'll have seen us through the pandemic, and we'll be coming out of it for him.
Should be by then. Let's hope so. Yeah.
So that would be that for me would be my contribution to the helping fight the crisis, and I'm very, very, very honoured to have had that opportunity. It's been an odd year, but probably one of the most important years that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and your role is about trying to sort of hold together our sense of civic identity, across the borough, which is why it's not a political role as such. It's not a party political role. It's a political role because it's about the whole community, which is what politics is. But it's not party. It's not a party political role because it is about saying we are all together in this, and I think that's been really impressive, the way people have felt together in this.
Yeah. And I think that is exactly really a very good point. It's difficult to kind of think about how to answer that because it is so spot on what certainly I've always felt this role should be about. It was a very much a personal ambition for me to one day take on this position, because I always really valued its position. I think there are some people that feel that it is, as a role, it does feel an anachronism in the modern age in so many ways. From the same time the royal family can do, but I've always seen the value that from those positions and the neutrality that they particularly bring.
Also, they symbolise something, and that's this sort of big language that a lot of British people find quite uncomfortable. The idea of symbol and all of those sorts of things. But actually, I think they're really important. And the role of mayor symbolises the life of the community as a whole. Which is why they're the first citizen. Because actually not, isn't I remember when quite soon after I'd been appointed, I was visiting one of the schools. It was up in Norwood, and one of the children said to me, "So why are you so important then?" It's a really difficult question. I thought, actually, it's not that I'm important. Jonathan Clarke is not any more important than anybody else. But what I'm called to do is an important role, and it symbolises something, for the churches, which is important. And I think,
out my mouth. I really do. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk across you. Sorry. No. I make exactly the same point. Maddie Henson is not any more important than another human being as well. And I think if people think I'm doing a bad job as a person, particularly in my role as a counsellor, I want people to tell me, and I want people to question me and to challenge me. But what you should never do is challenge democracy and disrespect the role of the office that I currently inhabit, because they are the important things.
Yeah, precisely so. Yeah.
as you see, Jonathan and I always get which is no bad thing for my part, at least on a selfish thing. I get a huge amount of satisfaction and value from having these sort of questions, these sort of theological and challenging debates and questions, which is partly what this channel is about. It's about having those discussions, about kind of challenging the value that challenging and providing justification for the value that people bring in the borough.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think one of the things that I regret on your behalf is that, you know, as mayor, you haven't been able to do as much as what mayors normally do, which is being able to express that sort of sense of civic identity at, you know, this, that, and the other event. You know, sometimes rather too many in a day, but you know, it's a really important thing to be able to do.
And maybe one day, it might be something that I'll consider doing again when the time's right, and then I might have a more normal year. I think but as I said, thank you. I mean, it genuinely means a lot. One thing you don't get used to in politics is people praising you. That you don't get a lot of that. So I always go a bit red when someone says something like that, because it's the one thing I've still not got used to learning to accept. And again, talking about the value the mayor has rang. The mayor is the first citizen in all key moments, good and bad, in the borough. And probably one of the hardest things, despite all the tragedy and difficult challenges that we've had to face, for me, was, well, there's been several, but particular one was the morning that Sergeant Matt died. I was always to go to CVA that morning, and I turned on the news, and it was head of the news, and I went, oh God, and I'm going to have to speak in an hour and a half. At an event with the deputy mayor for policing.
Oh no!
Oh
dear!
People coming. That was and I remember I got there. I was all right. I got there and burst into tears within about 5 minutes of arriving. And I just saw Donna and the two of us set each other off. And then I was literally just beginning to come to terms with the fact that I was clearly very, very emotional when I had to go and speak live over Zoom as well, as it turned out. But again, that's why the role became what was particularly important. I had to, but I think it did offer people that they could see that I was emotional and I was sad, and that it was okay to feel like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you need to, you need to be able to say something on behalf of the community in that sort of setting. But you know, to try and give the impression that you're not affected is, you know, that's not being on behalf of the community, because everyone's feeling affected. You know, it's just, you know, probably if you'd broken down completely, that wouldn't have helped. But to actually, for people to see that it's something that's having an effect on you, but still to be able to say something that, you know, enables people to have a sense of being together in it is really important at that time.
And again, and it just, I use it exactly, you're right, and I use that to illustrate exactly that point that you're making, that that's when the role, but both of our roles, and this is why I keep coming back to the synergy between them, how important they play in key moments, and probably drinking back to the pandemic, why they have become so relevant over here. Because that is that exact idea that we're trying to dance around, which is that people need their community leaders in moments of crisis. They need someone to stand up and be a leader. Because it is a scary thing to do.
It is. I mean, in any setting, you know, putting your head above the parapet and saying, okay, I'll do it, is an invitation for everybody else to say, well, why him or her? You know, what do they think they've got, etc., etc. But if it is a calling, then you have to do it.
And I, as I said, I welcome people to tell me and criticize me if I deserve it. And I want people to tell me if I'm doing it. If at any point that I'm not fulfilling up to satisfaction, I would rather know than no any day. But I do get the claws out if anyone then uses that to disrespect the office that I hold. That's the red line for me.
Absolutely, I think that's a real difference.
So, for instance, I don't say I don't expect people to say Madam Mary where I walk. I'm Maddie. I will always be Maddie, and I made very clear to Jonathan at the beginning, please call me Maddie throughout the interview.
Yeah.
But if someone then starts kind of like, that I think they're beginning to cross the line if I suddenly switch and suddenly the Madam Mayor starts coming up.
Yeah. Well, I have similar things. People say, how should I address you? And I say, well, I'm probably not going to respond kindly to "Hey you," but anything that's respectful, I'm happy with. And if you say "my lord," I'll probably laugh like a drain. But
exactly. I think that's quite a good point to move on to our next question that we're going to discuss, which is, what are your hopes for the future? And we briefly talked about keeping hold of this sense of the community that's been born. But what do you envisage and desire for the world post the coronavirus?
Oh, the world's big. Can I start with Croydon?
Let's start with Croydon.
Well, where I'm sitting now, my house looks out with a view of the top of what was once the Nestle Tower. And that reminds me all the time that what I really desire for Croydon is to have a centre which people want to come to and love being in, and that people go, oh yeah, let's go there for, I remember, when I was young, we used to come over from Bromley for, big shopping and big events, because at that point, Bromley hadn't built anything. So the nearest theatre and show place was Fairfield Halls,
Yeah.
And I remember when I was young, Alders took over the department store that used to be in Bromley. It was their first expansion. It was taking over Medhurst in Bromley and making it into an Alders. Croydon was a big place, and it was a focal point, Croydon Town Centre. And my hope against hope is that will become a thing again, because it should be. Croydon Town Centre should be a focal point, not just for the borough, but for the whole of South London, frankly. And it just fills me with sadness to see, that tower, whatever it's now called, sitting there sort of gutted, but nothing happening there yet. And, the endless difficulties with the shopping centre and so forth. And it just, I just wanted
probably
to.
Better if I don't get started on that. I think I might start going off on a bit of a rant.
Yeah.
About
let's leave it to one side, but yeah.
But no, I agree with
that's what I really desire, because there's as I was saying at the beginning, there's so much life in all the different, local hubs across the borough, but it feels like, it needs that sort of big heart to sort of bring it all together and make it into one place. And that's what I'm still hoping will happen for the borough. But it needs to be different. It was built, Croydon Town Centre was rebuilt in the 60s and 70s when you weren't allowed to build office blocks in central London. So the people were building them all around the outskirts in order to build office blocks where you could. We don't, that's not what's needed now. There's office blocks aplenty in central London. We need to work out what is going to make Croydon now into that sort of vibrant place. And I think it's going to be about being creative, about making things, about being a place where new ideas, new inventions, new things happen.
I agree. I think that we've got a huge potential. No, I think we've got a huge potential in that. And from the one thing Croydon does very well is we've got from a lot of charities and organisations that focus on looking after startups.
Yeah,
I should declare an interest, because the business that I hold is based in one of those. Again, both, I'm anonymising it at both levels, because I don't think it's appropriate to mention either of them individually given the circumstance. But I do have a lot of belief in those particular organisations, and they can because that is where I think that the future will come from. And then you get it connected with from a lot of the sort of the vibrant, almost like it's Camden-like culture that we're trying to build up. And That's one of the reasons why I was so excited when Croydon got made the Borough of Culture. I think there's a lot of potential that comes with that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many young people. There's such creativity around. Yeah.
That was only a year ago. It feels like a decade ago when we had that announcement, but that was only February last year.
Yeah, was it really? Goodness. Yeah, feels like a different epoch,
It does.
Yeah.
Well,
and I think the other thing I would say is I'm really hoping that that there'll be that sense of power coming up from below, that people will realize that they can make a difference in their own lives and in their local communities. And that's one of the things I think that what happened over this last year may help to encourage people to realize that they don't have to sit and wait for someone else to do it, but actually, to a large extent, they can help create their own futures. And I really hope that people will be able to grasp those opportunities.
I agree, and one way we will tell to see what happens with the voting figures. I know that's like a silly and maybe slightly selfish, centric, obvious thing, but that in the action of going and putting and making your voice heard in that moment is symbolic of your taking ownership of your community.
Yeah, I think it's one of the key things. Is, I still find it incredible that people don't vote. I mean, it was sort of my upbringing. It was like one of those things that you just do. You've got to vote, you use it. Every time you got a chance to vote, you go and use it. It's just sort of built into my DNA almost. So
very much mine. My parents were involved in very, very, very loosely in politics when I was growing up as well. So that added to my decision making that we mentioned earlier. But no, it's built into me. I remember every single time from the moment I was born till the moment I moved out, my parents always took me with them to the polling station.
Yeah.
But that's an advantage. I think that's both of us have been, as you say, have been brought up with that. If you haven't had the opportunity of being brought up with that part, it might take a while before it might take some particular event before you understand the significance of the action of doing that, of going to the polling station or returning a postal vote.
One of the things I'm really keen on is that people realize that they have power and agency. They can do something, and just to be able to do something is I think really important for being a human being. And to be passive is a terrible situation to get into.
And I think that it's also a bit of a vicious cycle as well, because if you start feeling passive, you start feeling disenfranchised and unpowerful, and then you're even less likely to vote because that's when the idea of nothing changes sits in.
And of course, a lot of people's life experiences have given them very strongly the idea that they haven't got anything to contribute and they are useless, and completely wrongly they think that there is nothing that they can do, but they've had experiences which have given them that idea because of racism or prejudice of other sorts, or just being socioeconomic disadvantage or whatever. So I think I wouldn't blame anybody for feeling that, but I just want to say what they do.
Yeah, exactly. I agree, and I think this is where we keep coming back to this synergy between politics and religious life. I think we see an awful lot of the same discussions and same discussions as well.
Yeah.
They I agree, and I would put a plea out to, I suspect anyone who's listening to this channel, the odds are they probably are the sort of people that are likely to be in some way already engaged with their civic life. I'm not naive enough to think that this is somehow going to go viral around the whole of Croydon.
Well, you never know. Probably not.
I would be did. I'm really doing well at my job, but I'm realistic. But if anyone that is watching it by chance, I would put that plea out. And I've done it. I had the opportunity of going live over quite a small Sky channel quite early on in my tenure as mayor, and I made exactly the same plea. There is nothing, and I repeat, nothing more important that you can do than go and vote. Even if it might not feel like it, but it's the truth. That's how change happens. That's how you can get in one tiny way that you can get involved in making a significant difference for the future.
Amen. Preach it, Mayor.
I don't. Yeah, agree. And sorry, it's one of those things. It's got me going on one of my real strong, very very strong, from powerful thoughts. And from sorry, it's difficult when you say something like that for them to kind of carry on the conversation because it feels like
that's right. Yes.
that's why we have the pre-prepared questions. It gives me something to go back to.
Yeah.
I'm obviously we've talked about really wanting the kind of vibrant town centre to return.
Yeah.
But is there one particular thing that you would wish we had in Croydon that we don't?
An independent bookshop.
Love it. Absolutely love it.
When I moved here and realised that the nearest independent bookshop is in Beckenham, I thought, that's such a shame, because my experience has been that they've been, for me, one of those places where I've encountered new ideas and new possibilities, because, in my experience, they've always tended to be places where, flyers tended to get left and posters got put up, and, people said, well, stuff that was happening that you might not otherwise hear about, you heard about. So it wasn't just the books. It was actually the, places that create a bit of a buzz and a bit of a sort of sense of ideas going around and new possibilities being explored. So I think that's what I'm really pointing towards, and that's my answer. An independent bookshop would be great.
Right, anyone who's trying to think about your next venture, please consider opening an independent bookshop in Croydon.
There's a gap in the market.
Entirely selfish, I'm going to be. Yeah, well, I'll go. And I'm going to be really, really naughty and say there's plenty of opportunity to do that in my ward.
Okay, then.
We do independent shops very well in my patch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But no, seriously, I think that would be a lovely thing. From other wards are available.
Indeed.
As long as it's in Croydon.
As it's in Croydon, that's the important thing.
I think that's lovely. I think that would be really, really lovely thing. And I think with the renewed sense of community, there is an opportunity for the high streets. There hadn't been for a while.
Yeah.
I've seen, again, a little bit my own ward centric, but still using it as a good example, where I have seen this genuinely increase in people that are shopping locally in the local
that's happened.
independent shops.
Yeah.
I got all of my Christmas dinner from the local high street.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I know it sounds obvious and it sounds silly and it sounds hippie and all those things, but it genuinely was nicer. Whether that was psychological, I felt like I'd done a good thing, or whether it because it was that bit fresher and more.
Yeah,
it's difficult to say.
I think, where I am, there aren't really any shops locally to walk to, because, when I've lived places where there are, you can just pop down the road and pick things up in different places, and you have a sense, you sort of know the people in there, and you just feel it's part of what weaves you into a community, really.
From which I think that if that's one theme that I think I would pick up from this whole discussion, has been that sense of community.
Yeah, absolutely.
It seems to be the recurring thing we're saying so much.
Yeah.
That brings us in the end to the questions we prepared. Now, I always take my interviewees with a slight surprise at the next bit. It's a nice thing, though. Don't panic too much. There's a podcast which I like, and they always end with something they call closing arguments, which is where I get the opportunity to shut up, and I give the last words of the interview to my interviewee to talk about whatever it is they want to talk about. Completely, no control.
Wow, so many options. The power. Put my phone off. I think the one thing I would want to talk about is to build a bit on some of the stuff we've been saying already, because I think both in what I was saying about in terms of how churches responded to the pandemic, and also what I was saying about in terms of people's agency, I would just say to everyone who engages with this conversation is to say, great to be listening, but I hope it'll inspire you into a conversation of your own, that you'll go out there and also have conversations with other people about stuff that matters, and actually really engage with one another and say, all right, think of someone who maybe you just chat to casually, say, how can I get to know that person better and really understand what makes them tick and help them to know what makes me tick, to actually deepen those relationships. Because I think too often we live on the surface a lot, and we're a bit scared of actually getting at the deep stuff. But actually, that's profoundly satisfying when you are able to share some of the stuff that really makes you who you are and really understand what makes someone else who they are. And I remember, again, when I was parish priest in North London, I realized that there were people coming to church who'd been saying hello to each other, in some cases for 40 years, but still all they knew about each other was their first names. They really had no sense of who this person was. And there was so much riches underlying all of that and trying to encourage those conversations. So I'd say go out and have conversations about stuff that matters and be prepared to talk about what it means for you to be you. And I think you might find your life a bit of a richer and a more exciting place there.
Wow. It was, what a way to end it. Absolutely wonderful. Caveat to that, obviously, remember lockdown.
Absolutely, yes. Observing social distancing and all necessary measures, yes.
No, how could anyone disagree with a word of that? That is what will bed you in a community. That's what will make you feel like you, from where you live is your home, and it will give you that opportunity to be part of something bigger. And it sounds a bit like from I think NatWest advert now.
Well,
no, everybody's part of something bigger. Croydon is a wonderful, wonderful place. The world is a wonderful place, and we all have a responsibility to ourselves to make sure that we live it to its fullest.
Great. Good to speak to you, Maddie.
Yeah, it's been wonderful.